Today we are talking to Dr. Katerina Guschanski, or Katja. She is a principal investigator of Animal Ecology at Sweden's Uppsala University, with a research lab looking to understand the evolutionary and ecological processes which cause biological diversity, focusing on non-human primates. Additionally, she is a senior lecturer of genomics at the University of Edinburgh. We hope you find Katja's enthusiasm as effective as we did. Enjoy!
So we start off do you mind telling us a bit about your scientific career? It's like what moments have stood out to you, or like what exciting research have you done?
Okay, wow, that's a big question. There's so many fun moments that were there. Okay, so I think let's start like this. So it all started. I knew I loved nature. I loved animals. I wanted to do something with that. I was convinced I'm gonna become a veterinarian until it turned out that I'm allergic to cats, dogs, and pretty much everything that veterinarians are working with. So that didn't work out. So my love for animals didn't take me that way, but it was also eventually became very clear to me that I actually wanted to see new things and not just do things that have already been developed, not apply a technique, but develop new things. So things that stood out, I guess I engaged in biology because I was like, oh my God, so this is nature. I can go out in nature. I saw documentaries and I was blown away by natural documentaries and the diversity of the natural world that was out there. And I was like, oh, that's what I want to do. And I actually want to go out and study animal behavior because then I can be in nature. I can observe these animals and I can infer something absolutely unique about what they're doing. And well, first things first, I was like, okay, so I've never been in the field, actually. I have no idea if I'll be able to manage field conditions. And it all looks beautiful in the documentaries, but there you don't feel the heat, you don't have mosquitoes biting you or leeches, or you don't need to live under really stringent and difficult conditions. Can I handle this? Yes or no? So the first thing that I tried to do was to get out into the field. And I went to Madagascar, which is basically a kindergarten for biologists because it's the safest place in terms of biological things where you can be. I mean, sure, there are parasites, but at least there are no big predators that are going to eat you up, except for crocodiles. But that's on the side. So there are no poisonous snakes, for instance. There are hardly any poisonous insects. And that was kind of my first initiation, and I loved it. I loved it so much. And there were some other aspects that I then suddenly realized that fieldwork is fantastic, and fieldwork I wish would be part of my future progression, future career, but probably not the only one. But because you're asking about things that stood out, I think those moments that I did spend in the field, particularly during my PhD when I went to Uganda and studied gorillas, mountain gorillas, spent 6 months there, basically running through the forest trying to pick up gorilla dung anywhere I could find it. And that was probably the best thing ever, just because, this level of emotional attachment to what you do, interactions with people of completely different backgrounds and educational levels and worldviews, but people who grow so incredibly close to you because you're under very difficult conditions and you're in one team and you have to rely on each other, and it just becomes an essential survival skill, basically, to trust each other and to rely on each other. That was probably one of the moments that stood out the most.
Do you get to do any of that now? Or is COVID like sort of just kept you locked up in the office?
No, I am locked in the office for most parts. Last time I was in the field was about 5 years ago now, so before my second son was born. It does become more difficult when the kids are there, and that's just me because I have a whole number of colleagues who are amazing and take their 1-year-old babies into the Amazon forest and and just do their stuff. So I'm probably not as courageous as they are, but it is possible. And I actually, kind of in the back of my mind, I'm hoping that this year maybe I'll be able to get out to Congo Brazzaville for another field session. to to collect samples for genetic analysis from great apes. But it's not clear yet. But I hope that it will be possible again. So it will be 5 years after the last time.
Right.
Yeah. Regarding your enthusiasm, because you speak with the great enthusiasm about your field, do you think school, or at any stage, maybe all levels of school, primary school, high school, do you think there was a step where at a point you realized that is where my field is going to be, that's what I want to do as an occupation in the future?
Yeah, right. Okay. So let's see. I actually don't think it was the school that did this to me, but also because I guess I kind of had a very big transition while I was at school. So I was born in Ukraine, and then when I was 14, we came to Germany as refugees. So we changed countries completely, and it was under quite quite severe conditions, and it was a big cultural contrast and a big break in what I did. So I think during this time when I was a teenager, I had other problems to occupy myself than trying to see what's going to happen with my life. But maybe to some extent, my mom is a scientist as well, so she's a physicist, and I think that's what I remember. And maybe that was the thing. So when I was growing up, and I would have questions about, like, why does it look like this? She was like, oh, let us do an experiment. Let's see if we can figure it out. And I think that was a huge thing, to kind of try and set my mind into thinking like, oh, there are questions about the natural world that I don't know the answers to, but I can think of ways of how to get there and how to answer these questions. And most of them will fail, and that's still true. It was true when I was a child, and it's still true now. But some of them might actually work out, or answer some other questions that I didn't even think I was asking. So yeah.
Right. Yeah, that is sort of like a segue to our next question anyway. So that's great. Our next question is, in your own words, and we plan to ask this from a variety of scientists throughout our project to really see what scientists, researchers think, what attributes should a scientist have. So could you tell us who you consider a scientist to be? So what sort of attributes and qualities does being a scientist encompass?
Wow. Scientists are people, and people are extremely diverse. And attributes that make a successful scientist, or that make a scientist, I think there are just so many that it's difficult to narrow them down, because you can be a scientist in many different ways, right? So you can be a scientist because you're extremely passionate about something. Just because you're curious. You can be a scientist because you think what you're doing is extremely important, and that's your drive. So, it's passion, but maybe passion, not just kind of like childish type of curiosity that lets you get out, but more a targeted, kind of drive and sense of need and sense of importance that gets you to do things. I think one of the qualities that I seem to be seeing quite a lot among my colleagues and among my students is persistence. And I think that's really an important factor, because actually science is failing to 99.9% of cases. So you fail on the most basal level when you have a question and you try to answer it, and whatever you're coming up with doesn't work. Right, so it's constant rejections. It's constant rejections of your ideas, of your attempts. Of you think of the most fantastic thing. You're like, that certainly will answer this question, and it doesn't. So and persisting over this rejection is I suppose kind of an equality that has to be there. That you have to be able to take these blows, and so I talked about these blows about your own ideas, but there will be other blows. There will be blows when you are trying to apply for grants and people think, oh, that's a stupid idea, or when you try to apply for positions and they go like, oh, this person, we don't want to work with this person for whatever reasons, right? So there will be tons of obstacles and rejections, and overcoming this and keeping this intrinsic motivation or this persistence or perseverance, I think that's one of the main qualities, I suppose.
Perseverance.
It's weird, you say.
No, it's maybe something a bit underlooked, because we feel like, sometimes a lot of people can have perseverance, but that's also being a scientist, a double fear and rejection.
I mean, it's actually because sorry, is it okay if I go on?
Please go.
Okay, no, because I think the traditional view of a scientist has been, and I hope it is changing now. And I don't know, you tell me, because you're the young generation, so you tell me how you see a scientist. But I think this view has been, this. I mean, obviously a white man, clearly, but this ingenious person who sits somewhere in his office and comes up with ideas that are just revolutionary and gonna change the world. And it's because, and these ideas come out of nowhere, and that's also wrong. I mean, that never happens. Mm-hmm. Ideas don't come out of vacuum, and there's no such thing as coming up with a great idea on your own in isolation. It doesn't happen. Science is an inherently, collaborative endeavor. It is ideas, even if individual people develop these ideas, they develop them based on something that they have heard and seen and thought about and were exposed to, and were able then to suddenly put together in a new way. So kind of collate it or synthesize it in a way that has not been present before. And that cannot happen in isolation, and that cannot happen, when you're closed in and don't talk to people and don't get yourself exposed. So this view, of this singular person is wrong, basically. And therefore, in my view, scientists are those people who engage, who are exposing themselves, who are challenging themselves with new ideas, with new fields, with new theories, with stuff that they kind of almost feel uncomfortable with, but maybe push themselves nevertheless to experience at least and try to understand and discuss and talk to others. So yeah, I suppose. Sorry, and I interrupted you because you wanted to say something else.
No, that's perfect.
No, that's great. Yeah. So maybe narrowing it down a bit more, what do you think motivates you to be a scientist?
What motivates me? I think I just derive so much immense pleasure from, thinking. So, okay, let me step back a little bit. So I think science is fantastic, or, being a scientist is fantastic in the sense that at some point you can define your own research questions, and you can go away and say like, oh, I want to see what is this yucky stuff that is stuck on the teeth of these museum specimens that I've been looking at, for instance. That's my case. And so what's in there? Is it what I think it is, or is it something else? So you can just like really, it's this ability to remain a child way beyond your childhood and be actually paid for doing this, and even to some extent, get other people enthusiastic about this. I mean, I'm still surprised that some students reach out and want to work with me. I'm like, oh my God, if you only knew, you probably wouldn't ever do that. But so this is something amazing, right? So you can just go ahead and go like, oh, I'm curious about this aspect. How about I'm trying, like, I'll try to figure out what it is. Right? Oh, I've seen that when I was like in the park yesterday. I've seen that happening. What is happening there? And I don't think there are many other professions that allow you this level of childishness, basically, and rewarded on top of that. So I think that's what motivates me the most. And this being said, of course, the reality hits eventually, because you can be extremely curious about many, many things, but it doesn't mean that you'll get the money and the means to actually study them. So there's a big filter afterwards. And in reality, many of the projects that get done are not necessarily the projects that the scientists wished, were on top of their wish list they would be doing, but these are the projects which they managed to get the money to do. So there's this component as well.
Why do you think that difference exists? Like, so the projects that you like might not get the money. So how do the people giving the grants, how do they decide who gets it?
Right.
What's their like motivation, I suppose?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. And you know, it's actually, so I've worked in a number of different countries, and there is a country specific difference in what projects are considered worthy of funding. So it is indeed different from country to country and from government to government. So there's a general idea that, of course, you know, things that are of value to humans and human societies that have an applied aspect, they are frequently more likely to get funded. So obviously, you know, if you think about now Corona pandemic, right? A lot of Corona research is being funded because it has a inherent application and importance to humans. Stuff that is not important to humans and or where the use of it is not exactly clear straight away, so consider some basic science, that the funding rates for this really depend on countries. Some countries are very good in funding basic science, other countries are not so good in doing that. Or, you know, where battle has to be fought much, much harder to obtain funding. There's also an aspect that is, you know, maybe somewhat counterintuitive because at least, you know, when I started, I thought of science as this fantastic rational entity, right, that is driven by rationale and logic and where there shouldn't be any emotional or cultural or fashion aspects that govern it. But that's not true because science is done by people, right? And people have all of their inherent biases and have their preferences and things that they don't like. So which means that there are fashions in science as well. For instance, you know, quite honestly, we started working on microbiomes, ancient microbiomes, but still microbiomes, because I was really struggling trying to get funding for our conservation work. I was like, oh, so which branch of research is actually being funded these days? So what seems to be not necessarily hot, but where is there money in research? And it was microbiome research. So we managed to combine our aspects of, you know, conservation and ancient DNA work and working with museum specimens with the aspect of working in microbiomes. But the reason I shifted there was because of the funding landscape. And I mean, don't get me wrong, I extremely enjoy doing it, and it opened up my mind and actually, you know, expanded the way I think about things and the way I see the world quite considerably. So in retrospective, it was a good thing. I wouldn't have gone there if not for the funding restrictions.
So is there any, oh, that makes sense. Yeah. So is there any way that scientists can sort of like form a union, I suppose, to try to influence where the money goes? Or is it like, I suppose the question is like, how much is it in their control, do you think?
Right, how much is in their control? I think some aspects for sure are, and there are big initiatives of scientists fighting and arguing for particular branches of research, and specifically, you know, there's, if you like, I mean, battle is probably too strong a word, but a polarization between scientists doing basic research or fundamental research and scientists doing applied research, with scientists doing fundamental research having to fight much, much harder for the funding to be there, and you know, to argue that fundamental research is fundamental because without it, we would be nowhere. You know, I mean, I don't know if humanity would exist in the first place, because things that are not inherently useful immediately and that don't have a immediate value may become valuable at some point. And even if they don't, they expand our knowledge. And that creates, again, synergies and abilities to put things together in a new context for other scientists working on other aspects. So I think that is one way of how scientists can influence it. And in all honesty, on a personal level, I think quite a few of us, the way we deal with that is moving around, changing countries, for instance, getting into new systems. You know, if something doesn't work in one place, then move to another place. And that, you know, that is possible to some extent. And but it becomes harder with age, and it becomes harder when children are there, or when you have a partner, and it's not just yourself. So there are costs associated with that as well.
So yeah, on that point, yeah, I noticed you moved around universities, and a few countries after your PhD. So you already brought up some of that. Do you have any other positives and negatives about moving around in like a short period of time?
Right. Oh yeah. So let's see. There are tons of positives about moving around. I mean, first of all, one of the reasons I wanted to do biology, and one of the reasons I wanted to do fieldwork, is because I wanted to see these places, right? And the only way you can truly see a place is when you stay there long enough and you work and you engage with the local communities, basically, right? Or the environment, and you kind of try to make a living there. So there's tons of positive things about moving around. It's experiencing new cultures, getting to know new people, learning new languages, seeing how the societal aspects of a particular place in a particular country translate into what it means to work there as a scientist. It's very interesting because I'll give you maybe a few examples afterwards. But and moving around, obviously, you get to know more people, and you get to know people that you would not have met otherwise, and it just makes your life so much richer. And it's fantastic. It's amazing. I've worked. So we came to Germany, and that's where I studied, and then I started my PhD, and then went to Uganda, and I worked in Uganda. Before that, I worked in Madagascar a little bit. During my studies, I went for an exchange year to the United States. So I was there for a while, for a year actually, and that was really cool, and it really changed the way I thought about science. And then so then I finished my PhD. I went to UK to do my first postdoc. Then I went to Switzerland to do my second postdoc. Then I went to Sweden to start my first independent position. And now I ended up here in Edinburgh, in Scotland. So yeah, that's really fun. And it's really great. I got to work with really amazing people on interesting projects. I got exposed to many different ideas, many different ways of living. And what it allows you to do is to identify things that work for you and that you really enjoy and you really appreciate, and take them along. And it also allows you to leave things behind that you don't really like. But eventually kind of, I suppose you want to settle, or it just becomes much, much harder. So what are the difficult aspects about moving? I think, particularly in retrospective, one of the most difficult aspects is leaving people behind. Leaving behind the social network that you manage to establish in a particular place. And even though all of us are well connected through electronic means and internet and whatnot, the level of connection that you can have with people when you see them every day is very, very different from the level of connection that you have with people when you have to write them an email or to ask them to join a Zoom meeting or something. So it differs. So leaving people behind is really difficult. The other aspect that is difficult is, of course, coming to a new place and starting everything from scratch. And that is starting research from scratch, doing something maybe completely different. So that was my case for my first two postdocs. Well, my two postdocs. Starting completely new topics, completely new themes, getting to know the system, getting to know the people. So it all takes out a lot of energy, but it's still, it's still fun and it's still possible. And it's easier to do it when you're on your own. You don't have to consider other people, and particularly when you don't have kids. So now, now that we moved, possibly for the last time, I don't know, because finally I started my first permanent position in Scotland. We had two kids, or we have two kids when we now moved. And it's suddenly not just about us. So not about me, and even not about me and my husband, but it's about us as a family. And our 8-year-old boy, just a few months after we moved, he basically broke down crying, saying that, "Mom, why did we have to leave Sweden? Why was it just for your work that we had to leave it? Why did I have to leave my friends?" it was really tough, you know, it was really tough to tell him, like, look, it's going to be fine. And I mean, he is fine, you know, he managed to get established, and he managed to get new friends. But explaining to him that this decision to take him out and break apart, you know, his social network and his contacts and his friends was motivated by job decisions for us was really difficult.
That's right. And I guess on a sort of relative term, sorry, just explaining what this voice sounds. I've just contracted COVID. I just had to clear my throat to speak about it. Sorry.
How do you feel? Are you all right?
I'm past the main period, so yeah, I'm a lot better now. Sorry. Okay, so yeah, back to it. Yeah. So yeah, on a relative note, you yourself, as a researcher and also obviously as a doctor in your field, where do you see the position of, well, not the position, sort of like the prospect of women in STEM in general? Where do you think it can improve? And obviously we know there's a massive gap at the moment, and how it should be improved. And governments and also research groups try to provoke different aspects of this to improve. So what are your views on it? How do you think it can improve?
That's a big topic, and that's obviously something that I have been thinking about quite a lot and have been affected by quite a lot. Right. So that might take a while. just
we have the time, so good.
No, that's true. I told you that it's open-ended, right?
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. One thing. So I'll describe just a few examples from maybe my own experience and highlight aspects that I think worked better than others. Our first son was born when I was a postdoc in Switzerland. So I have to say my husband is a scientist as well. So he's a physicist, so he's not a biologist, so he's working in a completely different field. But being a scientist, of course, he's very, very familiar with the entire idea of what it means to be in academia and trying to establish yourself and trying to get somewhere where your job is secure, because you asked about the aspect of moving around. Moving around is frequently necessary just because your contract runs out, and what are you going to do next? So you constantly have to fight to stay in. If you're not brilliant enough, which I'm not, so I'm an average person, so it was a constant fighting. So anyway, aspects of women's science. So our first son was born when I was in Switzerland, and Switzerland is a country that is based on the idea that women are basically, so if they decide to have children, that's what they decide to do. So that's their life. So they're becoming mothers. So they're structural aspects of the society that are not extremely supportive to women who are mothers who want to work. Which means in this particular case, I was officially given 3 months maternity leave. My husband's official parental leave was limited to the day of birth. And if this birth happened on the weekend, well, then he didn't need the day off, right? So, of course, one of the beauties of being a scientist is that there is flexibility, right? And we and people people are people understanding, and there's a lot of flexibility for what we can do. So what my husband did was to take 1 month of unpaid parental leave and stay with us for the first month. But I was at home for the official 3 months, and then I took additional 2 months of unpaid leave to stay at home with our little one, just because I couldn't fathom putting him into nursery when he was 3 months old. And then and then he was 5, and then he went to nursery, and I returned to work supposedly 100%, but I had sleepless nights because I was breastfeeding. I had to pump milk during working hours. I had to bike to the nursery once a day to breastfeed him as well. So clearly, I was not 100% at work. and I had 5 months of break, and of which my husband had 4. So this creates an immediate inequality between man and woman. And looking at man and woman at supposedly the same career stage, those who have children will look very, very, very different from each other. So that is Switzerland. Then we move to Sweden. Sweden is almost the opposite situation compared to Switzerland, where governmental system is set up in such a way that it expects both parents to participate in child rearing. It not only allows for this opportunity, but there's almost indeed a cultural and societal expectation that everyone will do it. And to be honest, one of the main reasons we do have a second child was because we were in Sweden, because it was possible. So what happened there was that we divided the parental leave equally between the two of us. So I stayed at home for the first 6 months, and my husband stayed at home with our 2 boys for the other 6 months. And I could go back to work in much, much more equal terms than it was possible in Switzerland. And that made a huge difference. That made a huge difference for my self-esteem as well, for my career, for sure, because I was able to remain productive during this time. And it also made a huge difference for my husband, who finally had an official opportunity to actually participate in child rearing. And that was wonderful. So I think these types of regulations are extremely important. The other aspect that I'm not sure, because I actually have not read anything about this. So this is purely based on me thinking this through and being exposed to different cultures. And this was triggered by me coming to Scotland now, because one would think that given the system in Sweden and given this incredible support that Swedish government provides to both parents and allows women not to take all the responsibility for childcare, but puts fathers in exactly the same position, that would mean that there are more women in academia in Sweden, which is not the case, quite surprisingly. And on contrary, I see many, many more female colleagues here in Scotland than I've seen anywhere else in countries that I'm familiar with. And my thinking about this is the following, and I'm not sure if it's true or not, but it kind of makes sense in my head at least. The British system, very much like Australian system, allows people to start studying, basically to go to the university at a very early age, to finish university, to start with their PhDs, to finish their PhDs when they're in their mid-20s, end 20s, or early 30s. And that means that the first time they can start an independent career and have a proper career track and some level of security about what's going to happen next is in their early 30s. And this means that women don't have to make decisions about reproduction before they know that they will have job security. So basically, by the time they're early 30s, they have job security, and they don't have, and that's when they can decide to have children, and it's not too late, biologically speaking. So they don't have to, to balance, will I have children, or will it cost me my career? Which happens in many other societies where this trajectory takes much, much longer time, and it's more delayed because people start later or because processes take longer. So I think, this ability, so clear career tracks and the ability to get in a position where okay, it's not just a 2 years contract, and then I don't know what's going to happen to me, and I may be on the street, but it's actually a tenure track position, or it's actually already some level of permanent position, and I'm secured, and I don't need to move countries, so I don't need to abandon everything. That helps a lot keeping women in STEM, because again, there's no need for this decision between reproduction and the, I say job, but it's not really a job. Life you like and want to do.
Yeah, it's like a lifestyle.
Mm-hmm. I think that was very long and convoluted.
That's very interesting.
That's great.
Yeah.
it's very good to know, obviously, the perspective of not only you as a person who experiences that difference, and also as a researcher and as a doctor of your field. It's very good to know that perspective as well. So yeah, moving on to our next question. I guess lots of people define success in career differently, and fairly so. What are some key steps you think you'd recommend us to take to establish a sort of successful, and maybe it's better to say fruitful, career in terms of science?
Right, let's see. So, what are the steps for fruitful career? So, maybe. So I don't know. Do you have a sense that you already know where you want to go? I mean, what you want to do?
Broadly, yeah.
Yeah, very broadly.
Broadly,
I guess,
It's a
yeah.
general view.
This is because it's too much that's interesting for us to like hone in right now. You know, I think once we're at university and once we start dabbling in the various things we find interesting, you might find that one thing that really grabs us to pursue.
Yeah. Feel like what stood out to me, and I'm sure that it's the same for Yash and Carlo as well, is that we, as scientists do, we sort of establish that hypothesis of what we want to do, and the more and more experimentation that we did, meeting more people and talking to more researchers themselves, we realize how far away we are actually to choosing that final destination.
Yeah, so I guess the reason I'm asking is because what are the necessary steps or the important steps for a fruitful career very much depends on A, whether you know where you're going, and B, what it is where you want to get. And the fact is, as you just said, things may change along the way. And I think, to me, and actually that's something that my group members have confirmed, is that it's not necessary to know straight away what it is that you want to do and to define the steps to get there. It sometimes is really helpful and useful to wander around a little bit and go like, oh, I find this interesting, or I find this interesting. Oh, I didn't know about that. Let's see what that is about. And figure things out as you go and try out new things and expose yourself to new areas, to new thoughts, to new skills in particular. So one of my master students was like, learn to code. This is the thing. Because if you don't know to code, you're screwed. But, no, I mean, so you can take it any way you like. If you enjoy coding, by all means, go and code. If you enjoy being in the field and observing the natural world, then try to do that. But then also get into the lab and see if that's something that you like to do. So I think at that stage where you are right now, trying to get into internships, into some type of lab experiences, or join research groups doing activity acts if at all possible, and just expose yourself to different things. I think that's probably the most important aspect. And as you say, when you start studying and when you start taking courses, you will feel this passion for something more than for something else, or maybe you won't, and then you go into research trainings and you join the labs, and then you go like, oh, that works for me, that doesn't, okay, and that will get you along the way. So I don't think there's a predefined set. So I was telling you about my field experience, but when I started biology, I thought I'm going to do animal behavior, and field worked. So field I checked out, and that was no problem. What didn't work at all was the actual animal behavior. So I realized about 5 minutes into my course on animal behavior that I will not be able to do that. And the reason for that was that obviously, the way of animal behavior that I wanted to study was this beautiful, observing the animals in their own habitat, like learning what they do, what the motivations are for certain actions, what are the triggers, how they make decisions. And that is an extremely passive activity, right? Because you're an observer. So you are there and you're recording things, and I realized I just don't have the patience for that. It took me 5 minutes. But it was something that I was convinced is going to be my career. Here we go.
How did you react to that? Like, just like personally? Because if you were set on that, like, it must have been devastating in that moment, I suppose.
Oh, it was really hard. It was really hard. I was so upset with myself. I think the only way I could, like, I managed to overcome it relatively quickly was because then I realized, okay, so if I can't be passive, then I need to be active, right? And what allows me to be active is to still be in these environments, still study these animals, but do something that that I can have control over. And in my case, it is genetics. And in a sense, so I wanted to study animal behavior because I wanted to understand things that we don't know about them. And genetics allows us to do exactly that. Just that, it allows us to see things that we can't even observe. So we can observe certain behaviors, we can observe some processes and try to infer why it happens this way or that way. But genetics takes us even further beyond the surface. So it allows us to see what other intrinsic motivations could be there. We can study parasites, we can study relatedness, we can study diet. So even though, for instance, if your behavioral study is on dietary choice, you may not see certain dietary items being consumed just because you happened not to be there when this was the case, or you turned around and missed this, or you couldn't identify what the animal was eating. Whereas doing genetics from fecal material, here you go, you see it straight away, it's black and white. So it's really beautiful, and it's really, really fantastic. So that's how, I could still engage with studying wild animals, being in the field as often as I can, but nevertheless, and then seeing something that I wouldn't even be able to observe, even if I was like this all the time.
Right. Well, this related to our next question. So we know about like all the exciting parts about science, like from like talking to you and talking to other scientists, just consuming heaps of media over the years. But we want to know what some of the unpleasant aspects of being a science are in your perspective. It's like what are the things that make people quit? What do you think? And what to do to avoid them?
Right. What are the things that make people quit? So, again, we have this idea that science is about that science is rational and science is logical, and it should be, right? But again, it's science is being done by people, and people are different. And I think so motivation and interest and burning for a particular question is a big aspect, but almost more important than a research question, when you start thinking about your master's, your PhD, or any type of scientific inquiry is the people you're working with. So having a supportive group and a supportive supervisor, and that's even more important than the research question or the prestige of the institution. And I think many people who do quit not because they don't like science, but because they end up in environments where they don't feel supported, where they don't feel recognized, where their abilities are maybe not supported or not fostered enough so that they can bloom as such. So I think that's probably what gets people out of science at a relatively early stage quite a lot. The other aspect is then, of course, job insecurity. So that what kicks in usually a little bit later, and usually for women more than for men, because of the reproductive aspect, where not having job security and wanting to have children and feeling that time is getting tight pushes people out of science.
So it seems that how difficult do you think it is for people to like end up researching the things that they're passionate about? Like, is it a thing that people like? Can people get stuck in something that they don't want to do, and because of a contract or whatever reason they can't get out of it? Like, is that something that happens at all? It's like, so I really don't know about that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't actually think that people would, so science is a great field and it does pay, but it doesn't pay enough to continue doing something that you don't really like.
Yes. Yeah.
So I think, having, for instance, scientific training, you don't have to stay in academia. With this type of skills, particularly if you can program, if you can handle big data sets, it's really easy to find well-paid jobs in the industry. So if you don't enjoy what you're doing or you don't enjoy your research question, you certainly are not going to stay in science. So I'm having difficulties imagining people staying in science and doing something that they don't like doing, because usually these people would be much, much, much better off elsewhere, right? So there's no reason to stay in science. So I don't think that happens. And when I say that the supportive environment is probably more important than the research question, that doesn't mean that you do something that you really are not interested in, but you have a great supportive environment, because again, you will not survive. Science is failure, and it's failure to 99% of the cases. So if you're not intrinsically motivated, if you're not actually enjoying the working on the question that you're doing, you're just not going to do that. It doesn't matter how supportive your environment is, you're just not going to stick around. What I'm trying to say is that, trying to go for the hot question or the most sexy topic, but ending up in a toxic environment is not going to get you far either.
Mm-hmm. So would you say that there's a room for people to move around a bit as a sort of figuring out what the things are that they find interesting? Absolutely. Okay.
And engaging with people early on, reaching out to scientists that you read their work and you're like, oh, this is cool. I have no idea how it's being done, but it sounds really interesting. Can you do something similar? And I think, scientists are very vain people, so we love talking about our science, right? And we love when people tell us that what we do is interesting. I mean, you probably have the sense already, reaching out to people going like, can we talk to you about your science? People go like, oh yeah, of course. I don't have any time limits. We can spend the entire day. So you can probably get the sense that it's relatively easy to do that, and I would very, very much encourage everyone to do that and reach out and so this enthusiasm and interest that really triggers us as scientists. Somebody is interested in what we do. Oh my God, it's not just me. Wow, that's fantastic. So let's talk to people about this. So I think it would allow you guys to collect experience and get exposed to many things, and this way figure out what it is you like. And and it's absolutely fine if you do something and you realize, oh, that's actually not my cup of tea. Like my behavioral studies, that was really not good. And it's fine, right? It helped me along, because otherwise I would have had this ridiculous idea and would be trying to do something and just failing.
Earlier on, you talked about your first field experience in Madagascar. I'm wondering, do you have any other life-changing or really influential experiences that you had?
Yeah, I mean, so life-changing. I'm not sure if they're life-changing, but so I talked about this joy of being in the field, and there's obviously joy in having in seeing your solution to the problem or to a scientific question being suddenly the correct one after you failed with 99 others, right? So this moment when suddenly things start making sense and the way you thought about that seems to be the right one, and probably in most cases probably not the only way, but in some cases it is one of the correct ways. That joy is incredible. I don't know, let me try to see if I can give you an example. So maybe I can tell you about one of our recent projects that we finished actually with so it was a project that my former postdoc was driving forward, and she's Australian, so here you go, here's a connection. And that's also a story that tells you that science doesn't happen in isolation. So I told you already that we started working on this yucky stuff on teeth of museum specimens. And that happened because another colleague of mine reached out, knowing that we were working on gorillas and knowing that we were working on museum specimens. She was like, Katya, listen, do you, like, when you go to the museums and you collect these gorilla skulls, do you see there have something brown on their teeth? Because we're working on human dental calculus. So this dental calculus is this calcified deposit of oral bacteria that grow on the teeth. So that's what you brush away every time you brush your teeth. But so if you wouldn't brush them, what would happen is that it builds up and then it calcifies. It becomes a fossil inside, like on your teeth, while you're actually alive. So you're carrying around fossils in a sense, which is cool by itself. Which prompted me not to ever go to dentist again. No, you would remove scientific material. I mean, we can't do that as scientists. Never mind. So she was like, okay, do you see stuff like that? Because we're working humans and we wanted to see if close human relatives, chimpanzees, gorillas, have something similar. And I was like, I have no idea. Let's see. I mean, and sure enough, there was something. So we collected it for this colleague. But that triggered us to then start thinking about, gorillas have it. Maybe other species have it as well. And we started looking around, and sure enough, bears have it, reindeer have it, elephants have it, giraffes have it. So there's tons of other species that have this dental calculus deposit, and it is a deposit of oral bacteria. So we're like, okay, so let's see, can we do something with that, right? And that's when Jala joined the group, and one of the things that people who work on human dental calculus realized was that, okay, sure, it's oral bacteria, and bacteria have many different functions that they perform, and some of the bacteria may have antibiotic resistance. So there are bacteria in your mouth that carry antibiotic resistance genes. And this dental calculus, the cool thing about it is that it preserves through time. Because it calcifies on the living host, it actually preserves over hundreds of thousands of years. So it's a really fantastic material if you want to study bacteria from the past, and bacteria from the past that live on a mammalian host. So we were thinking like, okay, so we have bacteria, they have antibiotic resistance. Can we use these bacteria to study the effect of humans using antibiotics and what it does to antibiotic resistance in wild animals? And sure enough, there was a fantastic collection of brown bears from Sweden, in a Swedish museum. And this collection spans the last 180 years or so. And humans started mass producing antibiotics in the 1940s. So everything that was before the 1940s would be kind of naive bacteria that were not affected by whatever humans were doing. And then, with time, so 1940s, humans started mass producing antibiotics, and then they use antibiotics a lot for good reasons, but also we know it has problems because antibiotic resistance is emerging and is increasing worldwide. And Sweden is also very interesting in this respect because it was one of the first countries to start implementing governmental policies to try and curb this rising antimicrobial resistance. So they banned the use of antibiotics in animal feed really, really early on. And then they introduced this very stringent program for the use of antibiotics in the biomedical sector. So we're like, okay, so we have these bears, they're wild animals, they live all over Sweden. They have their bacteria in the mouth. The bacteria have antibiotic resistance genes. Let's see if we can track this history of human antibiotic use, this, start of mass production, increase in use, and then decrease in use in Sweden, if that had any impact on the antimicrobial resistance of the bacteria that live in bear mouth. And so that's what Jella did when she started studying it. So we collected samples from these bears from 180 years in the past up to the present, and we quantified the antimicrobial resistance in the bacteria in their mouth. And we could indeed not only see the impact of increased use of antibiotics in Sweden, but also the impact of the decreased use, which suggested to us that human actions, we're kind of used to think about human actions as something negative. So we know we impact the environment, we know we cause biodiversity loss, we know we're responsible for climate change, we know we're contaminating and doing horrible things, we're destroying the natural world. But suddenly, with this particular project, we could see that if we actually do the right thing, we can have a positive impact, and we can at least mitigate a little bit all the damage that we have done. And that was really powerful. That was amazing to see that. And I think that gave us like a real kick and a real kind of level of confidence to say that, okay, we actually, if we do something, we have to act. But when we do act, we can do things, we can make things better. So yeah, so talking about this, life-changing, not necessarily life-changing, but really fantastic and kind of empowering moments. in scientific life. That was really cool. That was really cool.
Would you say that the direction of research is unknown because it's based off like all the discoveries that you make? Because it's sort of like you're stumbling in the dark with like a very weak torch, but you're just trying to find that one like little piece of gold to follow towards. Because like that whole story there just like seems like a connection of the ideas that just happen to be correct. Like is that the story for most scientists? Is that just how it works? But you're just trying to connect all these different dots together. Like how does it work? It's like a treasure hunt.
Yeah, no. Yeah, it's a fantastic question. It's because I told you the story after it was finished. You should have seen us in the process of doing it. That was not a connection. No, so that's what I was trying to say, right? So you get an idea and you start exploring it, and you're stabbing in the dark, as you said, and in most cases you hit nothing. And then sometimes you hit this next step that takes you somewhere else. But indeed, I think maybe this example is quite a good one to show how many different ideas from many different directions came together to give us an insight in something that we didn't even think we were going for when we started it. And that's why science cannot be done in isolation. I wouldn't have come up with this idea in isolation at all. If not for this colleague reaching out, I wouldn't be aware of dental calculus in the first place. If not for having this fantastic collection that spans all this time in Sweden, we wouldn't have done it. If bears didn't have dental calculus, it wouldn't have been possible, right? I don't know. Yeah, so it's tons of coincidences, and I think there's also this wonderful aspect. So when we write research grants, we come up with so we formulate a scientific question and we think of ways of how we can try and answer this. To formulate the scientific question, again, that doesn't happen in isolation. So for that, we try to collect many different aspects and put them in a new light and kind of put them together to create something new. And then we try to come up with ways of how we can solve it. But there was this fantastic quote that I got off from somewhere in the internet where somebody is saying, like, writing scientific grants should be its own genre in literature. And the other person replying, well, it is already one, it's called science fiction. I think that pretty much sums it up, right? Because when we do that, I mean, of course we're using scientific inference, and of course we're trying to use our best judgment. But at the end of the day, until we do it, really, we do not know what's going to come out. And chances are that, so in some cases our ideas are good, or at least they put us in the right direction, and sometimes they don't.
Right. And you would say that that's the story for most scientists, right? Is that true, or is it okay? Right. Well, so I think my next question, I think it grounds me as a teenager, just trying to understand the world and our place in it. So I think I want to ask: Do you think it's naive to want to have a career that has an impact on society, or do you think we should purely just follow interests, like regardless of any potential impact? Like, what do you think?
No, I've met many different people, and I know that a big motivation for some of my colleagues, for some of my friends who are doing science, is indeed to have an impact on the society, and that they are very much Okay, now I have to filter what I'm going to say. Otherwise, it's going to be completely inappropriate. No, I guess what I'm trying to say is the following. So, for some people, this is the biggest motivation, and I really admire that. And the reason I admire them is because it's not my motivation, and I think I'm being extremely egoistic in what I do. I do things that I enjoy doing, and if they help society, great. But if they don't, well, I mean, I have fun doing them, so I'm doing them, right? But that's not motivation enough for some people and for many people. And I really appreciate this, and I really admire this, because I'm not sure I could be selfless enough, that would be motivation enough for me.
Right. So I think the way I look at it is to try to tie the two together. So, because I feel like I'd be interested and excited in many different things. Right. I think I can get passionate about like a whole wide array of things, but also just try and direct that to something that still will have the impact. Try to get the both together. I don't know. It's just things we have to think about, I suppose, as we're growing up. Yeah. But it's like we're getting hit with responsibility. Yeah. I'm sure I'm sure you're aware.
Absolutely. Yeah. But the reality, of course, is that things that have societal value and societal impact are usually better funded. So, right. It's definitely not wrong.
Sure.
A bit of a different note. What's a typical day or week in your life look like? Like, how much lab or like hands-on research are you able to do? Like, are you able to use like cool technology and apparatus in a week-to-week life?
Oh my, I wished. Okay, so let me try to give you an idea of things that I do from time to time, just so that you don't get too scared before I tell you about my typical day. Right. So I told you about potentials or real field trips, and when they happen, so they happen very rarely for me. They happen now, of course, with kids much more rarely than they used to be, but they do happen, and they're amazing. I do spend time in the lab. However, that is usually limited to when I train people. So we work in an ancient DNA lab, which is a very peculiar environment that requires really dedicated training. And so I really enjoy doing it, but it's extremely time consuming and it's long hours. So it's kind of like going down in a dungeon, as some of my students explain. Are you down in a dungeon yet? Okay, so when you go down in a dungeon, you don't come out easily, right? So it's long hours, and it can be repetitive work. But I do train my students in these techniques, and I train them in other techniques, working with fecal samples, for instance. So that is frequently as much hands-on as I can possibly get. It's limited to training. It's limited to this, rare field trips, which then last for a month or longer. But it does happen, and I enjoy it enormously. In reality, however, the further you kind of progress, the less time you actually get to do the experiments. And I know some of my colleagues manage really well, so I have no idea how they do it, but they do allocate time, and they do spend time doing real experiments and doing real lab work, or running analyses themselves. I don't manage to do that, maybe because we have 2 kids, maybe because I'm just not organized enough, maybe for some other inherent reasons, I have no idea. But in reality, my day is very much determined by correspondence. So it's correspondence with my students, correspondence with colleagues, trying to put together projects, to communicate results, to facilitate, kind of infrastructural decisions, or decisions which research questions to answer, how to interpret these results. So we talk a lot about scientific results. We talk a lot about, which experiments to do, or which analysis to run, how to put it together. So that there's a lot of correspondence on this level. Teaching. So teaching is a big part of a scientist's career. my job, basically. I really enjoy teaching, but it is really time consuming. It's preparing the material, it's delivering the material, communicating with students, answering questions, making sure everything works. As of next week, I will be teaching a lab course for 140 undergrad students. That's going to be interesting. So last week I spent 2 days in the lab running through the experiments, making sure that we can actually do what we would be doing, and then preparing lectures, preparing explanatory material. So it's quite a lot of that. On top of that, there are other administrative responsibilities from within the university. So, for instance, currently we're going through a hiring process for a person at Edinburgh Genomics, which is a university-based sequencing center. So it's reviewing application materials, making recommendations, preparing for interviews, putting together questions for the applicants. I'm a member of the scientific council of one of the scientific societies. It's the Society for Molecular Biology and Evolution, SMBE. So the council basically is the entity that runs the society and that determines what the society should be doing, where the meetings should be happening, what type of scientific questions the society should stand for and address, how to increase equality and inclusion in the society. And at the moment, I'm evaluating applications for regional and satellite meetings for the society, trying to make proper and adequate decisions to support researchers in trying to run this. So it's a lot of work. And then, of course, there are people in my own group. And so their research projects where a lot of scientific communication is happening, but also people who have graduated who need letters of recommendation, who are going through their own interview processes and are, reaching out and going like, hey, can we bounce off these ideas? Can we practice, job talk and things like that. And so it's a lot of working with people, and it's really great. It's fantastic. It's really amazing. And although I'm terrified of the 140 people undergrad course in the lab, I'm really looking forward to it. Hopefully it works, despite the Corona stuff, but it would allow me to meet 140 people, and interact with them and kind of get to know at least some of them a little bit. And that's a huge joy. It's really fantastic.
That's really good to hear, yeah. And as we're coming towards the end of our questions, I just wanted to ask, there's probably like thousands of students, people just like us three, we're moving into university looking to better our understanding of a scientific career and what it holds. Do you have any general advice for young people, both for life, a career in science, anything like that?
Wow, okay.
It can be as broad as you want, as specific as you want, anything, if you have anything to add.
Yeah. I think, trying to put any other motivation than your curiosity as a driving mechanism is probably wrong if you want to go into science. So unless you're curious and just, passionate about something, don't do science. Science doesn't pay well enough to do that. It's just not worth it. And if you are curious and passionate, and if you want to do science, then take it as a collaborative endeavor. Try to make connections to your peers, to other people, to make friends along the way. This will help you avoid this competitive aspect of science, because you will have your network and you will have people you can rely on. So, but first and foremost, just do what you really enjoy doing. If you don't enjoy doing it, it's not worth it, because science is life, right? You have to enjoy your life. If you don't enjoy your life, you need to change something about it. So only do things that you really enjoy doing.
Yeah.
And yeah, this is our final 11th and, well, I get probably over 11th for the last question. Maybe it's sort of actually relevant to the previous question, but if you had one final quote, maybe 1 or 2 sentences to give us about, and we're in this process of meeting other people, and from each scientist we're planning to, if they're happy to, gather a book of quotes that that a scientist has given us, sort of one from each person, if possible. If you have anything, we'd be very happy to add that to that quote book.
Oh my God. One quote. Right. So now that puts me on the spot. Let's see. The famous quote. Okay, maybe that. Don't be afraid of doing the hard things. So things that maybe other people tried and couldn't figure out, or things that you've never seen anybody trying, because maybe they didn't look at it from the perspective that you're looking at it. Maybe they didn't have the information that you have available. So don't shy away from them. Don't always go for all hanging fruits. Try to try to challenge yourself. Just try to do something that's a little bit out of the box. I mean, not completely ridiculous, as I don't know, silica-based life forms or something, but something that's a little bit out of the comfort zone. I think, yeah, probably that.
That's great. Thank you very much.
That's really good. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for your time.
If you would like to, yeah.
Okay, guys.
Yeah.
It was a pleasure. It was so fun.
Thank you very much.
It's been an honor.
Yeah,
It's been very fun.
Yeah.
I love the excitement that you've been talking with the entire time.
Yeah.
It's intoxicating. Now I've got it. Now I want to go back to all this. It's great.
Well, I told you we're vain people. You let us talk about our science, and we're just